Hi folks, and welcome back to TechDays Online. Whilst we were away in the breaks, we had a number of questions come in, so we're just going to go through and answer some of those questions. That first question is, what's the best way to boot into a VDI environment? We're going to show you a little bit of something a little bit similar to that later on, but actually you don't directly boot into a VDI environment. You actually connect into it using a remote desktop services client on any platform that has a remote desktop services client available. Another question that came in was, does Windows 8 OS deployment from SCCM require 2012 SP1? Absolutely. If you want to be deploying Windows 8 using SCCM, then you do need to have SP1 installed onto your SCCM server. However, you can just go and deploy Windows 8 with MDT, and you can do that today. So you can start to play and explore deployment of Windows 8 and Windows 8 apps right now. The next question, does user disk VDI include desktop shortcuts and icon settings? The answer is yes, it does. Quite a simple one. The next question that came in after that was, if a user has a requirement for additional bit of software to be available to him or her, how is that newly published software kept available to that user if the virtual machine is going to be automatically rebuilt after 30 minutes? Well, there's a lot of different ways of answering that. The most obvious way would be to use some kind of enterprise software deployment like Config Manager in order to be able to advertise out to your end users those particular applications and deploy them into your virtual machine pooled environment. Obviously, they're going to reset every time, so if you did have a virtual an application that you wanted to deploy out to everybody inside of that pool, you would go and do exactly the same thing as you would do for patching. You go and install that application onto your template machine, and then you would regenerate all of the machines in your pool. If you're in a personal VDI environment, what you lose there is the ability to have people log on and log off and log back on into a completely clean environment, but you do have the ability for them to install their own applications and have those applications available to persist between them logging in and logging out and leaving their machines for a long period of time. And the final question that we got asked around VDI was, do the power states from the device that the user is connecting in with get passed through into the VDI session, thus applying those power states to your server? And the answer there is no. That would be kind of a really bad idea. If we pass through power states so that when somebody closed the lid of their laptop that they were connecting through to, imagine if they were connecting into a Windows server running in a session hosting mode, we wouldn't want the entire server to enter a hibernate state while that happens. So we don't pass through those particular sleep states. And then finally, we also had a question around Windows multipoint server. We're not going to cover anything about multipoint today. That is a particular SKU of Windows Server that allows lots of people to use their own mice to control the same kind of session inside of a Windows Server session. So we're not going to cover that today. It's a very niche area. If you do have any questions on that, though, please continue to ask them on the Q&A, and we'll deal with them offline. However, this next session is actually around virtualization inside of Windows 8. And I'm joined by David Noodleman, one of our MVPs, who's going to talk to us around about how virtualization works inside of Windows 8, what the requirements are, how this all comes together. So thanks, David, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And what do you want to cover?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Hyper-V inside Windows 8. Mm-hmm. Is this working? Okay. Yeah. We're also going to mention the benefits of App-V, which is another element of virtualization you can have inside the client OS. And a little bit about user experience virtualization, which is the next step, the next layer that Microsoft is introducing now with the new version of MDOP, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. Mm-hmm. That's one of the benefits if you have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft.
So just to very briefly introduce those for anybody that doesn't know, Hyper-V lets you virtualize whole machines on top of your Windows 8 machine.
Yes.
App-V lets you virtualize applications that could be running inside of one of those virtual machines or on your native desktop, yep, so that they don't have to install into the registry and all that kind of thing. And then user experience virtualization virtualizes the user state and makes that completely transferable across machines.
Yes, so in the end you have a OS layer, an application layer, and a user layer.
Cool.
Completely away from each other, so that helps a lot the whole virtualization and VDI world.
Excellent, okay.
So starting with the client Hyper-V, so Hyper-V is now available inside Windows 8. It provides a robust platform, so it gives to the end user the whole power of Hyper-V that's available on server, allowing people to run multiple virtual machines. It allows you to use all different kinds of storage. So you can have a USB drive hosting a machine. You can have your local disk. You can use a network share somewhere. And you can use the classic iSCSI or even SAN, even though you're running on a Windows 8 machine client. Gives you flexibility of choice. So any machine that supports virtualization, for example, any i3, i5, i7 machine will do that. Most of the modern machines will support virtualization on the client side.
So we actually have some specific requirements there around the chipset and what's going to be turned on there. So things like second level address translation in an Intel world in order to actually enable virtualization components, right?
Yes, so most of the older machines will not be able to do that, but if you're running a lot of virtual machines, you need a beefier machine. You probably would invest in a newer one, especially because the amount of memory the client Hyper-V can support is quite high.
Yeah, really huge.
And there's a lot of improvement in efficiency. So Hyper-V on a client is very good to replace that old requirement. So developers, they usually request more and more virtual resources. So at least they don't request physical servers anymore. So I had the pleasure to work with banks where they had huge virtualization clusters with thousands of machines, and they're all used for by the development team, so they were not actually in production, but they were consuming a lot of server resources. Now, what you can do is give them machines that are a bit more powerful, with more memory, and they can run all the testing and all the development in virtual machines inside their own environment, isolating network from the actual network, so one developer doesn't impact the machine of another developer. And everything you do on the client can be ported to production very easily. So it's very easy to move a machine or copy a virtual hard disk and move to another machine.
And also, one of the things that we can do with Visual Studio 2012 actually is natively support deployment directly into a Hyper-V client machine. So if we do need to spin up a new OS, you can hit F5 inside of Visual Studio 2012, and it'll actually deploy a virtual machine for you. Yeah,
that's all tied in with the new stuff that's on Hyper-V. So I think the most powerful one is it's fully integrated with PowerShell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where the integration with other applications come in. Even if you're deploying Windows 8 with MDT, you have the option to enable Hyper-V while deploying.
Absolutely.
All tied in with the PowerShell integration. There's a lot of new features. We'll make this slide deck available.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole lot of information on that, that particular slide. So much so that it's very hard to read.
The slide decks are informative. They're not, to read through during the presentation. But there's a lot of interesting things. They support a lot of different guests inside the OS. So the latest addition to this list is Ubuntu 12, right? It's now supported inside Hyper-V. So even if you're deploying with playing with alternative clients to your server application, you can still do that on an isolated environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for anybody that's watching that's using Hyper-V on servers, the inclusion of Ubuntu is actually a really interesting place. We used to previously support, from a server point of view, Red Hat, FreeBSD, and a couple of SUSE and another OS as well. Ubuntu has actually been supported on the client OS, not on the server OS at this point in time. And the reason for that is that we're actually seeing people use Ubuntu on clients, not on servers right now. So we've gone out there and matched that particular need.
Yeah, and I think the flexibility that Hyper-V gives you on the client is all about being able to test without the real impact on your production environment, or either pre-staging everything locally and then moving it to production.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, well, better than talk about it.
Absolutely.
It's just let's showing how it really works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just switch you over to your machine here, hopefully. There we go. Excellent. There we go.
Good. So the move is quite simple. You just have to I'll just show where the machine is. It's running. a critical application.
Excellent. So DOS. Excellent. Brilliant.
So if you look at the settings, the machine right now is hosted on the C drive.
Yeah.
And as it's my C drive on a laptop, I want to move it to an external storage device.
Excellent. So you can take it away with you.
So in this case, it will be a USB disk.
Excellent. Okay.
So the procedure is quite simple. You just right-click on the machine, select Move, move all the machine, select where you want to move the machine to.
Okay.
It will display how much available space you have and the current size of the machine.
Excellent. Okay.
When I click Finish, it will start the move. You can see it's moving it right now. It's a very small machine because it's just a demo.
Absolutely. It's just running DOS, in fact.
Yeah, it's running DOS, so the move is complete. So if we check the settings again, the machine is still running, and the hard disk is on the external disk.
So that's an absolutely perfect example of it. You may want to use the move to do a couple of things inside of a client virtualization environment. What you might want to do, exactly what you've just done, drop that virtual machine onto a USB key so that you can then take that home and complete your testing on your home PC, for example. You also might want to use it just because you want to move it to a different location on the same hard drive, just because it's a nice, easy way of changing all the file paths that are required inside of the Hyper-V settings to do all of that stuff.
Yes, and it allows you to move to a network share anywhere, so that's
fabulous.
Enables a lot of flexibility. Talking about isolating the whole thing, there's a lot of networking options. So there's a virtual switch manager. So in this case, I have an internal connection only. So those machines can only talk to my machine and between the guests. They can never go out on the network and interact with them. Excellent. So that's very nice if you want to test a DHCP server.
Absolutely.
You can keep it isolated and not affect the whole company.
All the rest of it. Yeah. Absolutely. And to be fair, that's something that we do on a regular basis. Andrew and I, with our demo environments, run up DHCP servers all the time. We have to be really careful not to allow them to have access to the Microsoft corporate network, because if that happens, we get a group of guys around at our desks literally within seconds to tell us that we need to turn that server off because it's interfering with everybody else's connections.
And another thing about restricting and not allowing machines to overuse resources, one of the nice things you have on settings is a bandwidth. Where is it? Bandwidth management. So you can specify how much bandwidth on your connection a machine is allowed to use. I think as a last point on Hyper-V is it now supports wireless connections as well.
Absolutely.
So on the previous version on server, you had to connect a Ethernet cable and have an active NIC in order to use it, even if you're only using internal networking. Now you can have a wireless connection and share this connection with the guests as well.
Absolutely. You don't need to go and create, do something really complicated like do any network bridging. You don't have to go and set up a RRAS server in order to provide NAT inside of that environment. You literally just go and add in the network adapter, create a new switch, say that switch is going to be using that particular wireless adapter, and away we go. Everything's set up. So really super simple way of doing it. One thing I'll point out at this point on this bandwidth management, if you left that ticked right now with those settings in place, that's going to cause you some really interesting network issues, because you've actually got the defaults there of 0 megabits per second, and it does what it says on the tin. It gives you a 0 megabits per second network connection. So what you'll see is that you do still have connectivity. You can, for example, still ping that virtual machine, except it'll take forever. So you need to be very, very mindful of that. If you do tick that box, you want to set some settings in there. One of the places that I particularly use this when I'm doing testing is I actually use it so that I can throttle back bandwidth to see how things perform over a slow connection. So if I'm playing with something like branch cache, for example.
Yeah, that's the demo we all
absolutely. Yep, I will use this to implement a slower connection for myself. So again, if you're doing application testing, really great way for guys to be able to go and test what happens if the bandwidth slows down that they have available to them. So fantastic areas. I think the one final thing that I call out within all of this, and we can't really demonstrate it very easily because it's very hard to do in terms of projection facilities. However, what we could do is take one of David's virtual machines here, turn it off, go and grab the VHD file and mount it, and then just by typing bcd boot space, then the mounted drive, /Windows, into a command prompt which has got admin privileges, we would then be able to natively make that virtual machine bootable. So on the next reboot, we could select to boot into our virtual machine. That's a really handy story because not only do we then have a virtual machine which we can always run virtually, we have one which, with one reboot, can be physical. So if I'm testing something virtually and I want to know what the performance would be like on real physical hardware without any virtualization, that's a reboot, and then I can test that installation. So really, really handy if somebody's coming to you with performance issues over something and saying it's because it's running virtually, you can disprove them with basically a single reboot. So.
Yeah, and just answering a quick question we had before the event is people were concerned that Windows XP mode is not available on Windows 8 because you don't have the Windows Virtual PC.
Yes.
So I found out recently that there is a way to do it. You install Windows XP machine inside Hyper-V. You install the Windows XP mode update inside the Windows XP, and you can get the same functionality.
Excellent.
What I'll do is I'll just post it on my blog, so you guys can share.
What we'll do as part of that as well, after David's posted the link on his blog, we will post David's deck along with our own deck, so you get all the PowerPoints from today onto the UK TechNet blog, and we'll also link over to the article on how to get things like well, basically applications that were running in, say, a virtual version of XP appearing on the Start menu inside of